one of the big signals, comments, likes, and shares on Facebook are a really big indicator of whether or not the information that you're putting out there is valuable to the audience that you're trying to reach. If you spend all that time creating content, somebody likes it, somebody shares it, somebody takes the time to comment, you have to respond to that because it's a positive signal back to the algorithm that you're actually engaged with your audience. Not only are you reaching them, you're reaching them to the point to where they want to have a conversation with you. And then you need to be engaging. That's going to be a positive signal back to these algorithms that are driving the views. Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Digital Ministry Podcast. I'm your host, Nick, and this episode is brought to you by Media Impact International, always brought to you by MII. MII is a great team, has the experience of working with different digital ministries all over the world. And MII, for those that don't know, employs teams of different follow-up teams in different parts of the world, rather than going through where all those are. I will say that they work in, many different languages, many different environments. And the benefit of that is that they get a lot of exposure and a lot of experience dealing with different types of strategies, ranges from maybe a church that has kind of their own, brand and digital ministry effort, all the way to more of like an outreach focused ministry that's really trying to use social media and digital tools in order to reach people in whatever persona or audience that they've defined as, most important or key to their mission. MII supports all of those efforts. And one of the things that I think is really interesting is that we're seeing a trend develop among these teams. MII manages social media presence for, on behalf of ministries, kind of like an agency model, but they also consult or work with a lot of different organizations as well. Kind of as a partner, they will help speak into your ministry strategy or help to diagnose, where there might be areas for improvement. Say you're not getting the results that you want. All of those things are, really valuable, but I'm seeing a trend emerge that I wanted to talk about today. And it has to do with kind of the public social media management aspect of running Facebook group, Instagram, channel, YouTube channel, things like that. All of these different platforms, they're called social media platforms. They're designed to allow people to be social. That means there's a two-way conversation happening in a lot of these channels. And one of the things that teams often struggle with is staying up to speed with or keeping pace with the public conversation. And there's obvious reasons why this is a challenge. It's on display for everybody else. For every one person that writes a comment publicly, on a post, or they comment on a video, there's hundreds, maybe thousands, depending on the team that you're working with. There's thousands of other people that are watching that conversation, kind of silently lurking, trying to see, like, how are you going to respond? What's somebody going to say? This is especially challenging whenever there's a difficult comment that's made. It might be antagonistic or making an attack. How do you respond to that? I've seen some teams just delete those. Let's talk about that today. I want to talk about how do we handle those interactions. So number one, I've got 3 steps for you. Number one is be social. We have to respond to those. And when you respond, if you're dealing with these kind of one at a time, or there's no kind of policy or strategy around your public response, I would encourage you to spend some time as a team thinking about how do we want to engage with people. They're going to be on a full spectrum of positive to negative comments that are being made on your social media channels. How do you want to engage? Think about the audience that you're trying to reach. Think about your brand voice. All of these things are things that we've talked about on the podcast. We've talked about these in the MII newsletter. If you haven't, if you're not familiar with that, you can go to mii.global, sign up for the newsletter. It's a great resource. There's a blog page there, which has all the past articles that have been published on the newsletter. Some really good information about how do you think about the perception or the image that you want to deliver. And delivering that through your reply to public comments is an excellent place to work that out. If your team doesn't know how to respond, if they haven't received guidance on what type of tone of voice do we want to take, is it okay to just delete comments? Do you delete them right away, or do you delete them, after the conversation takes a bad turn? All of those things really need to be defined. I would encourage you to lean into the replies rather than deleting comments. And that's going to be point number 2. We'll get to that in a second. But the lack of understanding about how to respond sometimes causes the delay. That can be the source of the delay, the reason why we're not responding in a timely manner to these public comments. So, number 1 is you need to respond. You need to be social and really think about how are you going to respond to those comments. Point number 2 is the algorithm. So I said we're going to talk about deleting comments in a minute. Really, the bigger issue here is how do these social networks, these social platforms view your engagement with your audience? One of the big signals, comments, likes, and shares on Facebook are a really big indicator of whether or not the information that you're putting out there is valuable to the audience that you're trying to reach. If you spend all that time creating content, somebody likes it, somebody shares it, somebody takes the time to comment, you have to respond to that because it's a positive signal back to the algorithm that you're actually engaged with your audience. Not only are you reaching them, you're reaching them to the point to where they want to have a conversation with you. And then you need to be engaging. That's going to be a positive signal back to these algorithms that are driving the views. Things like YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, your reach will expand and increase the more active you are on these public conversations. So there's a lot of purpose behind those, kind of strategically, you want to be engaging with those. We've talked in the past about vanity metrics, likes, shares, comments. They might not be meaningful in terms of like ministry outcomes that your team is trying to achieve, but that doesn't mean they're irrelevant. They're incredibly important for the purpose of furthering the conversation. And like I said, algorithmically, it allows your channel and your conversation to be seen by more people. So leverage social media as best you can by engaging in these comments. Don't ignore them. Don't let them sit. Don't just delete them when they're hard. Really engage. I mentioned earlier that for every one person that comments, there's hundreds or thousands more that are watching that public conversation. This is a really key element here that I don't want to move past too quickly. Sometimes people are just lurking. Sometimes people haven't yet had the courage or, really initiative to comment or engage with your team themselves. They're wanting to see what that interaction is going to look like. They're wanting to see, like, will I be met with condemnation and rebuke? Will I be ridiculed? Will I be, if I put myself out there, I'm really concerned about what people are going to say. You're modeling that experience for people that haven't yet taken that step. And so whether it's public or private, people are watching. So that's another thing to think about. Okay, so now the third point. The third point is most ministries that I've seen have some type of effort to bring people from a public conversation into a private one. That's a very good thing. There's all kinds of follow-up tools. There's teams that have been assembled to have those follow-up conversations with people, kind of a one-on-one private conversation. People, if they're lurking, if they're kind of watching the public conversation to know what that private experience is going to be like, you want to make sure that you give them a good example of like how you're going to respond to them. It will encourage them to take that step to move into, let's just call it an offline conversation with your follow-up team. So that's the goal, right? Like all of this is the purpose of trying to get people into a conversation where you can really understand their needs, really meet them where they are, really begin to minister to them. So that's what we want when they take that step. This is the third point, is we need to be responsive. We really need to be timely. And this applies really both to the public conversation and the private conversation. We can't let those sit. We need to respond rather urgently, like in a timely way. Teams that I've led in the past, we've had an internal goal of we want to respond same day. Ideally within the hour. And I know that some people listening to this are currently living in an environment where it's like, I've got 1,000 messages coming in. There's no way I can respond to all of these in an hour within them being sent. And I get that. There's been this tension between reach and follow-up capacity for years. There's some tools that can help us deal with that today. Tools like chatbots. So I think people have all kinds of different opinions about chatbots. I'm optimistically skeptical when teams talk about chatbots, but I understand the purpose. Like if somebody takes the time to write a response privately, they're direct messaging us, they are, filling out a form, they're coming into our follow-up process. I want to be very responsive. A chatbot can help me do that. You can even identify it as a bot. You don't have to kind of masquerade as a real person. People are really good at figuring out if you're being fake or not. So you don't really want to do that. You want to say, this is a bot. I'm here to help make sure that you get in touch with the right person. This is a very common experience with customer service teams all over the world. So, I write to Google or any of these services that we subscribe to, my cable company, my power company. Everybody's got a chatbot now. So people are very familiar with this, more so than they used to be. But you can ask a series of questions. I see, you've responded to this web. Say, what questions do you have? Is it about the Bible? Do you have questions about how to pray? Do you have questions about, what are some of the common themes that you see in the conversations that you're having with people that are responding to your messaging? Pull those out as suggestions for where the conversation can go. You can ask people, what is it that you would like to talk about? That's kind of a discovery process that's going to set up once they get to a live person, it's going to give that follow-up person a lot of information so that they can start the conversation intelligently. They're not just kind of going in blind. They will have some understanding of what the person's searching for. So that's really valuable both to the person that's responding to your content and to your follow-up team. So that's a way to really kind of buffer a little bit. If you've got big reach and you've got limited follow-up capacity, that might act as a filter a little bit. But we need to respond in a timely way, because often if we don't do that and days go by, there's an incredible amount of loss that is seen in that follow-up process. Say you start with 1,000 people, everybody gets a response 6 days later. You might only get like 10% of the people continuing the conversation. You've lost 900 people, and all of the effort that's gone into the content, the ad buying, the structuring the campaigns, getting them to respond, we've just wasted it at that point. So really, if your team is completely overloaded, and unfortunately, like a measure that we can take immediately is to reduce the ads, like shut the ads off or shut off whatever, is creating the inbound to give your follow-up team time to catch up. Another option is to grow that team rapidly, quickly. And this is where, MII is available to provide follow-up resources. We keep a team staffed to support ministries in those efforts. This isn't a sales pitch. I'm just trying to give you options. There's optionality here because I'm seeing a lot of teams get stuck with these things. They don't have time to respond publicly because they're so overloaded privately. Well, we got to build the resources there privately in the private conversation so that we can be responsive. And then as we're working back upstream, we need to really kind of designate people to engage in those public conversations. And if those are lagging, if it's hard to do, it might be because there's not really a follow-up or like a response process or policy in place. So that's another way that leaders can kind of resource their teams to be more actively engaged and responsive in that public dialogue, which is incredibly important, as I've already mentioned. So I'm just seeing this as a pattern kind of emerge among some of the different teams that I've looked at over the last several months. I thought we'd talk about it today. I hope this is helpful. Some of these, one-off conversations where I don't have a guest, I'm kind of sharing from our recent experience. They've been really well received, both on Spotify, Pandora, like the different channels that the podcast is on, especially on the YouTube channel. We're getting a lot of people writing in privately saying, hey, that episode was really great. I shared it with my whole team and we had a great dialogue around it. I'd encourage you to share these podcast episodes that you find helpful. But I'm also encouraging you to give me some feedback. Like, are you experiencing these challenges? Is this something that you're dealing with? What are some other ways that you've solved this problem? I'd love to know. This ideally would be a two-way conversation, or we can even get digital ministry podcast audience talking about these things, like in YouTube comments or something like that. I would love that. I think it would be really fun to see and just explore, maybe have a larger conversation happening around these issues. So I hope this is helpful and valuable to you today. If you have any questions about any of this stuff, you can always email info@mii.global. We've got a team of people that are happy to, take those questions, respond, provide resource, and follow up with you. So be well. I hope you have an amazing day, and thanks for listening to the Digital Ministry Podcast.